So the first source we turn to is Customary International Law. And we need to answer the question, what is Customary International Law? Well, Customary International Law is that body of commonly accepted rules of conduct, international norms, you might say, that have arisen out of consistent and long-standing practice and that nations have followed out of a sense of binding obligation. So customary international law could be described as custom, the thing that countries do. And as it has developed over time, then it gains credibility, it gains legitimacy. So that's what customary international law is. Essentially, we have two elements that together make up this notion. The first is a general practice, meaning something that most countries do, and it is accepted as law. So in order to qualify as a customary international law, there are these two elements that must be met. It must be a general practice of nations, and it must be accepted as law by other nations. Now obviously, there's a lot of gray area here in terms of the first element, that of practice, where we look at, well, what constitutes practice? Is it something that you claim to do? Is it something that you actually do? Is it something that you vote for in an international body, say the General Assembly of the United Nations, but then ignore in real life? Or is it something else? So what is a state practice? Is it enough to have a national law that says this is the state practice, whether you do it or not? Or does it require actual practice in absence of a state law, or contrary to what the state law is? So the very first element, you can see there's a lot of room for gray area in determining what is a general practice. We also have the problem of how much practice is needed. Is it a general practice if it happens once? If it happens twice? How much time do we need to establish something as a general practice? How many states have to engage in this practice? Does it have to be a majority of states? Does it have to be the important states, the major states, the large population states? Again, another issue where there's no clear-cut answer. And we also look at the notion of how much consistency is required. Is it something that states will follow when it is convenient to do so, but refuse to follow when it is not? So these two elements, general practice and acceptance as law, there's a lot of gray area in both of those in determining whether something is a customary international law. Now, the major case discussing customary international law is in your book, and it's called the Packet Habana. The Packet Habana arose out of a conflict during the Spanish-American War. During that war, a number of Cuban fishing boats were seized and in the blockade of the harbor of Havana, and then were brought back to the United States for sale. Historically, in wartime, enemy ships were available to be taken, returned to the opponent's country, sold, and then the money distributed among the crew, and then a portion went to the state. So during the Spanish-American War, we had a United States vessel capture several fishing boats, several Cuban fishing boats. Now there's no doubt that the Cuban fishing boats were being operated by nationals of Cuba who we were at war with. Nevertheless, there was this question of their fishing boats. Is it right to take a fishing boat and then sell that and use the proceeds to fund private affairs. Well, this case went to court. It went to court, and the court examined the situation, and they said, well, what's the law? What is the law about taking fishing boats during wartime? There was no question if these were combatant ships. If these ships had been fighting the Americans, they would have been available to be taken and sold, and the profits then split among the victors. But what about fishing boats? And so what the court did was look at, well, what is the general practice? What has happened in the past? And in this case, the court found out that for the most part, fishing boats were not considered legitimate wartime prizes, even where those fishing boats are being operated by citizens of the enemy, the country that you were at war with. So, because it was the custom to not treat those boats, fishing boats, as prizes, the court ruled that in the Packet Habana case, that the proceeds of the sale of the ship should go back to the original owners and not to the captors. Now this Packet Habana case has become quite famous. There are obviously some issues with it. At the time, of course, the survey was of the major seafaring nations. However, conspicuously omitted was the United Kingdom, which historically had treated fishing boats as legitimate prizes. But in any event, we know that practice, acceptance as law, that's customary international law, and this is the holding of the Packet Habana case.